welcome to Canyons Church. My name is Andrew, and I am so glad for you to be joining with us today. We have a great service planned for you. And before we get started, I wanted to share a few things with you. First of all is our mission, to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. And a growing relationship is movement in a direction, right? So it looks like something. And I don't know where you're at in your journey of faith, but if there's a next step that you've been debating, you've been thinking about, you've been praying about, you've been wondering what that might look like for me, or maybe just the next question for you to ask, we would love to be able to partner with you in that journey, in that process. So please, if you could reach out to us, if you could show up to a service and ask some questions if you're in the area, or comment on whatever you're watching this on, or talk to a friend, however that works, we want to help support you in this process, in this journey, in a growing relationship with Jesus. One more thing that I wanted to say before we get started. Next week is actually our 4LCV launch. This is our initiative that we do every single year. It is our opportunity to give, serve, and love in our community. So this year we have a very specific target and a goal, and we're really, really excited about it. You're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be an opportunity for us to create some change in our very own LC Valley. And we love this place, and we know that God loves it even more than we do. So we want to partner with Him in providing an opportunity for some people to get ahead. This week we are in part 2 of Love Thy Neighbor. We just kicked it off last week. It actually is only a 2-part series. So last week was the kickoff, and this week is the conclusion. So you can go back and listen or watch that other one, and you can hopefully stick around and watch this one. We'll be here for just under an hour. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it's helpful, encouraging, challenging, all the things, because we want you to make a better decision and a better choice and a better step today for your tomorrow. Last week, we started talking about being a neighbor, right? This whole series is called Love Thy Neighbor. So obviously, we're going to talk about neighbors. And there's this moment that Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? And one of those answers, part of his answer was that you're to love your neighbor as yourself. Like, that is one of the key components. That's what it looks like to follow Jesus. And we kind of wrestled with this for a little bit, and we got to a place where we recognized that in order for us to do this well, we have to adjust our perspective. That ultimately everyone is someone, that we can't just love people that are like us and call that, you check the box and say that we're doing a good job of it. It's everyone that is maybe like us and everyone that might not be like us either. So everyone potentially is your neighbor. We used this terminology actually last week, that a neighbor is someone in the ripple effect of your life. If there's someone that you bump into at the grocery store that you've never met before, neighbor. If someone that you bump into with your vehicle that you've never met before, neighbor. If there's someone that lives in the adjacent property to yours, neighbor. Someone that lives in your house, neighbor. Someone that looks in the mirror, someone watching you look in the mirror, neighbor. Like, this is anybody that's in the ripple effect of your life should be considered a neighbor. And when we finally wrap our brain around who our neighbor is, today we're going to talk and shift gears to what that actually looks like. So now that we have identified who our neighbor is, now let's look at what the action steps are for loving our neighbor. Jesus uses an illustration that we're going to look at today, and it's really kind of the title of it, the underlying theme of it is it's an oxymoron. We don't understand it that way. We just think it's a good title. But the title itself, the idea itself is an oxymoron. It's two separate ideas that don't seem to go together. They seem to be contrary to each other. And we're going to get into the context, and I enjoy it because it's so, in context, it is so controversial at this point in time. But with understanding the context, with understanding that this is actually an oxymoron, we're able to actually apply it into our own lives today. And I hope this is beneficial for you. So, again, similar story from Luke's perspective vantage point as last week. So Luke chapter 10, Jesus is asked what the greatest commandment is. And like I said, in part of this answer, he says, well, love your neighbor as yourself. So this is in Luke chapter 10, verse 29. The man that asked this question of Jesus, he feels kind of good about himself. He's like, well, let me kind of add to your added on Jesus. He says, but he wanted to justify himself with it. Anytime that you want to justify yourself to Jesus, it's trouble. That's trouble. Trouble up ahead. Justify himself. So he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Like, Jesus, come on. What are we really talking about here? Love your neighbor. Who's my neighbor? Like, who's actually my neighbor? Who am I actually supposed to love? Come on. He's looking around like elbowing people. Come on. That's funny, right? This isn't that big of a deal. Jesus doesn't see it that way. Jesus doesn't see it that way. In fact, we're going to look, like I said, we're going to look through this illustration that Jesus gives. It's a parable, meaning that it's not a factual story. This actually didn't happen, but Jesus created this story in order to prove a point. And in my perspective, in my understanding, I think parables are actually even more poignant. Why? Because Jesus created a perfect story in order to illustrate his point. He didn't have to be within the confines of a story that happened. He could create it exactly as he wanted it to happen. And what we're going to look at throughout his illustration, throughout this parable, is that there's a to-do list. First of all, there's a need to notice. Second, there's a barrier to break through. And third, a price to pay. This is what it looks like if you want to put some action terms to loving your neighbor. This is what it actually looks like. Need to notice, barrier to break through, or in a price to pay. Now, again, we're about to jump into this, but before we get started, this is one of the most difficult teachings of Jesus. And if we understand it, if we fully comprehend, if you're not dozing off throughout the story, if you read it or listen to it and you fully get it, it's going to provide some discomfort. It definitely provided a tremendous amount of discomfort for his original audience when he shared this parable, this story with them. And it should do the same thing for you and for me, especially for me. But we'll get into that in just a second. So this is that need to notice that we listed. The first to-do, the step on the to-do list is need to notice. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem. So remember, the man asked him who his neighbor is. Jesus answers, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. And when he was attacked by robbers, they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. So this man he's having a bad day. I mean, that he's lucky to be alive at this point. In fact, if he's left there, if nothing changes, by nightfall, he will be dead. Like, this is the situation that he finds himself in. He is reliant, completely dependent on somebody else stumbling across him and helping him out if he's going to survive the day. This was a perilous journey from Jerusalem to Jericho. This was not a safe journey. So this man being by himself was not, ideal. In the worst case scenario happens, he's attacked, he's beaten, and left essentially for dead. And noticing someone's need. I mean, this is the very first step. I mean, in this story, it's obvious what this man's need is. He needs physical help. He needs someone to help him out physically, like he's bleeding out, essentially, like he's dying. He needs someone to do something for him on his behalf. In your world, in your life, there are people that are in it right now that have very obvious needs. And you may know them or you may see them, but it's your choice whether to pay attention to them. There's a need to notice, to actually have eyes on, to actually let it register what is happening and what their need is. And if we're If we're trying to be a good neighbor, if we're trying to be, the neighbor that Jesus wants us to be, then we have to pay attention. There's this thing that we do. I don't want to put the stereotype on men often do this, but we do this. If I don't see it, I can't be held accountable for it. And I don't think it's often, at least in my scenario, I don't see things often. And it's not that it's a conscious decision, like I'm just going to keep blinders on. I'm not going to look. And then I don't, my wife can't be too upset because I just didn't see it. It takes all the wind out of her sails. There's no more defense. It's just like, what do you mean you didn't see the pile of dishes? Like, what do you mean you didn't see that mess? That was like, I don't know. I just existed and I saw my own pathway, and that's all that I saw. I just walked right by it and I didn't even see it. I don't know. I'm really good at it, I guess. But this, when it comes to, the husband-wife thing, that's a whole separate issue. But when it comes to loving our neighbors, this doesn't cut it. Right? Choosing to put the blinders on, and I know that we all do this, right? We start to see the need, and then it's like, oh, I can't go down that road. I can't do that right now. I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. I don't have whatever it might be. You're like, I just can't. I don't have the bandwidth. I don't have the margin. I can't do that right now. Because if you actually allow your eyes to fully focus on what you see, if you actually notice the need, you will feel compelled to do something. And so often we almost try to put those blinders on. We get so caught up in, as far as Christians go, this is where we're really good at this. We try to, dive into Scripture even more rather than recognizing that there's a very simple application of what we just read. Or we try to read our Bible every day to check it off the list, but do you take what you read in the morning and take it out with you to your work or to your school or to the relationships that you have? Or we want to keep the blinders on in our application. But the reality is, if you're just reading to read, then what's the point? I mean, great, good for you. You may have more knowledge, but is it actually producing application? Is it actually producing action and results in your life and in your relationships? If not, I'm not sure what the point and purpose is to just amass knowledge. Anyway, so this is not good enough. If I don't see it, I can't be held accountable for it. Putting blinders on is not it. That's not what we do. Loving like Jesus means living without blinders on. This is a choice that we make. I'm not going to keep the blinders on. I'm going to take them off. I'm going to remove them as much as I can. When I start to see the blinds, when I start to narrow my vision in order for me not to see what's going on, I'm going to make a conscious decision. Nope, I'm not going to put the blinders on. Why? Because I'm going to love like Jesus. And the first step to loving like Jesus is this need to notice. So I have to notice. I have to make this a priority. I have to make this a value for me. Now, Jesus continues on with his story. He says, a priest, meaning like a pastor like myself, someone that is a religious authority. A priest happened to be going down the same road. And when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. This is like, it's not good enough to just step around the man. No, he's going to avoid it altogether, go over the road to the other side to avoid the man. I mean, he didn't even want to talk to him. He didn't want to be around him. He didn't want to look at him in the eye. He's got too many things on his plate. He's got too many things to do. His schedule is too full. Whatever it might be, he determined that it was more important to continue on moving forward than it was to stop and notice the man that was dying, that was literally in his path. Do you do this ever? I am a firm believer that God presents us with opportunities, and it's our choice whether we're going to take advantage of those opportunities and to choose a step in the direction of our loving Heavenly Father. Which means that we sacrifice, which means that we pause, which means that we stop and we look. There's a need to notice, and we actually notice what's placed in front of us. At the end of your day, when you evaluate, often we go through the checklist. Did I get all my stuff done? I think there's one more filter that we often miss, and that is, Did I do the thing that God tried to add to my checklist? Like, did I recognize that my checklist becomes secondary to God's checklist for me? Like, there's something that God placed in my pathway. It wasn't on my plan in the morning, wasn't on my agenda in the morning, but there it was halfway through the day. There it was. What was I going to do in that moment? And if we put the blinders on, we just keep on going, we're going to miss that opportunity to love and to live like Jesus. And that's exactly what this priest does. So to a Levite, this would be like, another leader type person, like a small group leader, in the church, someone it's a good person. This is a good person. So to a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him pass by on the other side, this man does the exact same thing. He does the same thing. He sees that there's something up ahead, and he doesn't have time, he doesn't have the energy, doesn't have the resources, doesn't have whatever it might be. He's devalued the need that he sees right in front of him, and he moves around him. And this is really where it should start to bother you. It should bug you that the pastor or the priest didn't do anything about it. You're like, they really should. Like, isn't that kind of what they're supposed to do? Andrew, that's what you're supposed to do, right? But then Jesus is like, yeah, no, it's not just the pastor or the priest. It's also just a good person. It should start to be uncomfortable at this point. You should start to see the direction that Jesus is moving us all in this story. Because that's you and that's me. Right? That's all of us. He's starting to say, wait. No, it's not just the average, or it's not just the unique, it's the average as well. All of us can be kind of lumped into we try to be good people, right? We try to do the right thing. For the most part, we try to do the right thing. And he says, yeah, you're included in this story. And this is what I know. That good people will always be able to find good reasons to walk on by. It's our brokenness, it's our humanity in us that we prioritize self over others. And it may be a really good reason. We can justify it, we can argue it, we can debate it all day long, and someone's never going to be able to convince us otherwise. But come on. When you pause, when you just stop defending yourself and just stop talking for a second, when you allow your brain to run out of air, like in all the excuses and defenses that you have, when you actually stop and give it space, you know this. You know this. You know that you're just giving a good reason to walk by. You may have a good reason, but just because you have a reason doesn't mean that it's good. Doesn't mean that it's the priority. Doesn't mean that it's most important. Last week we talked about if we want to change the world that we're in, Jesus did this. Other leaders did this throughout history. The first century Christians that started this movement, that took it from what Jesus did and exponentially grew it in this early time. They believed that if you loved your neighbor, you could change the world. And we have good excuses. We have good reasons not to love our neighbor. And when we don't do that, nothing changes. I think that Jesus intentionally made these illustrations church people, right? They're church people. They're looked upon as just good, solid people that you would expect good from. You would expect good things from them. Like they've prioritized something in their life. They should be good. And they go to church, right? So that should account for something, whether they're leading a small group, whether they're a pastor, whether they're involved somehow. Like they should have some skin in the game here. But here's something. I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Going to church is great, but it's not the goal. Going to church is great, but it's not the goal. Like, Andrew, aren't you supposed to tell everybody you're supposed to go to church? Your pastor, that's how people get into church, by you telling them how valuable and how important it is. Yeah, it is absolutely valuable. It's absolutely important for you to be in church and part of a community that's helping you move and grow in the direction of your loving Heavenly Father. But going to church is not the end goal. The end goal is to love like Jesus. I believe that going to church helps you love like Jesus. So if you're watching this at home or you're experiencing this alone right now, I would encourage you with my whole being to find community to be able to help you along this journey, along this process of moving in that direction. But church in and of itself, that's not the goal. The goal is to take a step towards Jesus. The goal is to move in the direction of Jesus, loving like Jesus, living like Jesus did with his perspective, with his integrity, with his ability to move on behalf of others, regardless of what was on his schedule for the day. So now we get to a crucial point in the story. Like this is where the story shifts. This is where the music, like, it changes to something else, a little bit more dark. The temperature rises in the room because, right? You've seen one strike, two strikes. On this third strike, you're like, this is going to be this is the moment for the hero. And Jesus introduces a character, a person that his crowd, his audience that was listening at this time, there might have been an audible response. Like they may have started to boo Jesus in this moment. Because the character, the person that Jesus introduces can't possibly be the hero that Jesus is trying to make him to be. Like Jesus would have gotten some mean tweets that night had Twitter been around. Like there would have been a response because Jesus had intentionally chosen this person, this character. And in verse 33, chapter 10 in Luke, but a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. Like the crowd is getting agitated at this point. Jesus is probably having to elevate his voice to be heard because people are like, no, like they're booing him, they're yelling at him, because there's so much disdain for Samaritans at this point. There's so much disdain. There's so much animosity towards this people group. And there's plenty of reason why. They had all of their reasons why. They had all of the justification that they need. This was what happened, that historically there's a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom of Israel. I mean, it used to all be one, but then they split and separated. And the northern kingdom actually started to drift a little bit more. Like they actually allowed Baal, like this temple in their own land. Baal being like a god of a different nation. Not only that, but these northerners, they started to intermarry with the Assyrians, which were their own captives, like the people that took over the space. They started to intermarry amongst them. So the southern kingdom, they started to view the Samaritans up north as like their blood was tainted, their lineage was tainted because of that. And you have this political, and you have this, spiritual, you have this racial tension of these two people groups that did not like each other. I mean, they despised each other as much as they possibly could. This is a family feud on steroids. It's almost a civil war. Like they just hated each other. They hated each other. How dare Jesus use a Samaritan as the hero in this story? But that's exactly what Jesus does. Why? He needs to cause a visceral response within people. He needs to bring attention that this is how deep this truth goes of who my neighbor is and what it looks like to love my neighbor. So, we've discussed the need to notice. Oops. We discussed the need to notice, right? And we've got to the point where there's been a pastor that walked on by, there's been a churchgoer that walked on by, and now we have someone that is despised by the crowd, like they're the worst of the worst, and they notice. Now we're going to look at the barrier to breakthrough. The barrier to breakthrough. And there's a comfort barrier. There's a like social norm barrier. There's a political barrier. There's all these different aspects that create barriers in our life. What is expected and what we kind of feel like we can't bump up against, that we shouldn't cross over that certain line. But here we have in Jesus' own illustration, like the story that he's creating, the man that has every reason, like the other two men didn't have a reason to not stop. Not valid. The crowd would have known this. You and I know this. There's not a good reason to not stop to help someone from dying. Especially when it's your own countrymen, especially when it's like your own people, your own neighborhood, your own person. And yet this man, right? We've had 2 strikes, and yet this man, this Samaritan, he breaks through the barriers that are there. Why? Because the barriers aren't important. What is important is that this man is seeing that he's noticed, and that he essentially, his life is impacted and hopefully saved. Like, hopefully he doesn't die because of this Samaritan. We can't effectively break through a barrier unless we identify it. You can't effectively break through whatever that is that's holding you back unless you first are able to see it. Unless it's like a really clean sliding glass door. Then you might break through that without even seeing it. But the greatest barrier to loving our neighbor is usually our baggage and not our bank account. This is the token response, right? Well, I can't do that. Really? You can't do that? Because let's be honest, most often you can. You just have to sacrifice something else in order. Like those dollars were already spoken for. Like you're gonna go do that thing, or whatever you were gonna do. I was gonna buy that other, whatever it might be. That might have to wait just a little while in order for you to help this person in their need in this moment now. So often the financial burden is not the reason why we don't do this. In fact, if you don't have the means to address the need, typically we have relationship with people that if we would just simply talk to them would have the financial ability. Like we could go and speak on behalf of this need to this other person we have a relationship, connect the dots and make it work. So usually that's not the primary. Now what's your baggage? What is it? What is it that you're carrying that is keeping you from doing exactly what Jesus asked us to do? Is it simply discomfort? Like it's just, I don't want to do it. It's not comfortable for me. Is it a time thing? Is it, what is it that is keeping you? Is it that you don't want to cross the line? You don't want to treat someone like that doesn't believe like you, that doesn't see the world like you? Is there some type of judgmentalism thing going on here? Is there something that you're being critical of somebody else? They're lying on the roadside dying, and you're not willing to help them because of, what is it? The first step in this is to see yourself clearly. To identify, need. Again, we've got a need to notice. We've got the barrier to break through that. Once we see it clearly, we can effectively move beyond it. Why? Because once you call it out for what it actually is, yeah, well, I just have a problem with someone that voted that way. I just have a problem with someone that has that bumper sticker on their car. I have that problem with someone that has a certain lifestyle that I don't agree with. Well, that's not the issue for keeping you to love them like Jesus loves them. Right? Because last week, like we said last week, Jesus didn't just die for people that go to church. He didn't just die for good people. Jesus sacrificed his life for anyone and everyone, just for the opportunity for us to choose to receive that gift. It's for everyone, not just some, it's for all. One sacrifice for all. And we shouldn't be the barrier. We shouldn't be the one that's deciding, oh, I'm not going to extend my love, even though Jesus extended his life for them, right? Anyway, so barrier to breakthrough. Third and finally, there is a price to pay. Once you see the need that's there. You notice the need. Once you break through, you've identified what your barrier is, and you're like, you know what? It's just that. I've got to move through that because that doesn't sound like Jesus. Now you recognize there is a price to pay. There's something to do. There's an action step to all of this. And it goes beyond just our mindset. And this is what Jesus said that the Samaritan did on behalf of this stranger, on behalf of this man that was dying. So in verse 34, he went to him, meaning he didn't go around him. He didn't move away from him. He moved toward the mess, moved toward the messes that you see in your life. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey. He's not like, no, you got to get in the back of the truck. He's like, no, come on in the cab with me. Brought him to an inn and took care of him. He put him in his own vehicle. He bandaged his wounds himself, like he got his hands dirty with this man's situation. He took care of him. He took care of him. Then he continues on. He says, the next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said. And when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have. This is incredibly generous. He's like, I'm going to take care of him. But if for some other reason it even costs more, I'm going to make sure that you're not left with this debt. You just put that on me. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes, you put that on me. You know, I bet this man that had, that much spare change just rolling around, he probably had plans for that money. He probably had plans for his time. He probably didn't want to stop there and stay in that inn that evening. He probably had plans of something else for his donkey to carry. But his plans became secondary to what God had put in his path to notice, to break through a barrier, and then to do something about it, to pay the price with his literal own dollars, like his own wallet. He pulls out his own wallet to start to pay for the price that this man needs in order to be saved. He pays the price for his neighbor's healing. What's the price that you and I need to pay for our neighbor's healing? When we recognize the need, when we break through the barrier, what is the price that needs to be paid? Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to do that? Because that's what it comes down to. If you're going to follow Jesus, this is not a suggestion. Jesus is telling us what it looks like to love our neighbor. And he just said before this, the greatest commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. Like, this is how you follow Jesus. If you're not doing this, you're not doing a very good job of following Jesus. There is a price to be paid for following Jesus. There's a price to be paid. He continues on. He looks at the crowd, the audience. I'm sure that there's probably not a whole lot of jeering anymore. There's probably not a whole lot of boos or whatever. Right now, it's probably pretty silent. There's probably you could hear a pin drop if they had those around, I'm not sure. You could probably hear a rock get kicked, let's put it that way. It's pretty quiet. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? It's like, what? You can argue that it was the man's fault. He didn't have the proper resources to protect himself. Yep, that was his problem. He fell into that trap. But no, Jesus says, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor? Isn't it obvious? I mean, there's no possible other response that the teacher of the law could have given. He says, well, the expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. Don't go and teach your neighbors that are in pain, that are dying on the side of the road. Don't go and beat them over the head with the Bible and the knowledge that you've accumulated. No. Go and do likewise like this Samaritan did. Like this man that you have hatred for in your heart. He is the representation of God's love for someone in this moment, in this story that Jesus concocted, this illustration. Go and be like that Samaritan, this good Samaritan. You know, a good Samaritan isn't a term that Jesus coined in order to describe heroes. It's an oxymoron to describe Christians. An oxymoron meaning that there's there's two contradictory terms that are coming together in order to draw attention to the point. In order to be interesting, like create the attention drawn in to this point, that there is a good Samaritan. And in their mindset, that did not exist. Like the context of the story, good Samaritan, that you could either have someone that was good or you could have a Samaritan. There was never a good Samaritan. But he says, hold up. Let me paint you a picture. Let me paint you a picture of what it looks like for someone to be a neighbor and who that neighbor is. As Christians, as people that follow Jesus, we should be oxymorons. At this point, our world, our society, our communities, you've heard this. You've heard all the negative responses when you bring up church, when you talk about being a Christian, right? You've probably had some stories about people that just don't like Christians. Why? Because they've had experience with Christians. Because Christians are people, and people fail. People don't follow through. People live contradictory lives. Like there's so much wrong with us because there's so much wrong with people. And as Christians, as Jesus followers, we want to be oxymorons. We want to be contradictory to someone's expectation and their experience. We want to be like that Samaritan. That when they think, no, not this, not now. All that I've experienced with Christians is they're so judgmental. Is that they don't like people that are not like them. And what Jesus asks you and me to be and to do is an oxymoron. To contradict those terms by our action, not because of our knowledge, not because of our ability to debate someone into a political category, but to live in a certain way. That actually, and for you and for me, if you're a Jesus follower, that it is more than just a suggestion, this is a commandment, but this is actually what we want to be. It's who we believe we should be to start with. And if you're not a Jesus follower, this is exactly who you hope Christians would be. It would be a lot easier. It would be a lot more alluring for you to step across the line of faith or into a church building as a whole if Christians actually behaved this way. If we actually lived our lives the way that we think that Jesus lived his life, the way that we describe him with those terms. If we actually did that, I think we would see a dramatic impact made in our community. You've probably heard people say, oh, the church is there just to take money out of your wallet. That's all that they exist for. They just want your money. They just want your money. Breaks my heart when I hear that because too many times, that's probably someone's experience, that too many times they've seen the church take someone's money in order to do something selfish, right? That just to do something for themselves within the church walls. At Canyons Church, this is what we're trying to do it different. Because when you're generous at Canyons Church, you're not just giving at Canyons Church, you're giving through Canyons Church back into our community. This is exactly what 4LCV is all about. And next week, we're going to launch our 4LCV campaign this year. We are so excited about the opportunity that we have. And we're actually going to partner with the LC Valley, the Lewis and Clark Valley Youth Resource Center. And this is a huge need in our community, whether you've been able to see and notice this need or not. But there's a lot of kids, there's a lot of students in our communities that have a lot of need. in this organization is incredibly, they are meeting the needs of these students. They're providing a place that is safe for them to get them off the street, to get them out of unsafe environments and into a safe environment, to get them food when they need it, to get them away from the turmoil that they might be living in and day out. To go over to the bloodied, bruised body on the side of the street and do something about it. That's our opportunity. That's what we want to do. If you're going to miss next week, like if you're not able to be here, I would encourage everybody as much as possible to come to our service next week. But if you're not able to be here, you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait for that service to actually do something about it. If you jump onto our website or you use our app that we have, if you do that, you can actually give and then categorize your giving towards 4LCV, and every single penny of it will go towards our goals that we're going to introduce and we're going to talk about next week. In addition, next week, I just want to give you a heads up. It's going to look a little bit different online. We're not going to have the opportunity to pre-record it because we have some special stuff that's going on during that service. So we are going to record the actual service that happens at that time, and then we're going to upload it a little bit later, either Sunday night or Monday. It's going to look different. So just ahead of time, just give you a heads up. It's going to look different, but it's going to be a great opportunity for us to actually be the good Samaritan in our own community. Before we go today, I just have a couple questions to kind of drive home what we've talked about. First of all, what need do you need to notice in your life right now? What need do you need to notice? Secondly, what barrier do you need to break through? Third, what price has Jesus asked you to pay for your neighbor's healing? Think about this. Talk about this. Wrestle with this with the people either that you're watching with or people that you have a relationship with. Figure out what this means in your life and do something about it. It's not enough to just hear, but all of the difference is made in the doing. Do something about this. Let me pray as we close up today. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you. Because before we ever were asked to do anything, you first loved us. From the beginning of our life, before we were even alive, you knew who we were. You knitted us together in our mother's womb. You created us with a specific uniqueness that we all carry. And you've given us all worth, immense worth. We know how much we're worth because of how much you are willing to pay for us with the life of your Son. And God, I pray that as that shifts our mindset, that we would actually see the people around us like you see them, with that same value and that same worth. And I pray that we as a community, that we as a church would move about in our world and we would act and behave and respond differently. That we would see the need, that we would pay attention to the need, that we would notice the need. That we would break through the barriers, whatever might be in our way. That we wouldn't move away from what you've placed in our path for the day. We would move to it. And that we, in full recognition of what you've done for us, that we, out of a response for your love for us, that we would be willing to pay the price that is needed for someone's life to dramatically be changed. For there to be health. For there to be worth and identity communicated. For there to be hope once again in their life. God, I pray that you would give us the courage to do just that. That we would learn who our neighbor is, and that we would see and do. That we would do exactly this. That we would go and do what you've asked us to do. To love our neighbors and to love them. In your name we pray.
You are here, you're moving in our midst. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, I worship you. I believe, say, waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Come on, sing it out. You are here. You're touching every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here. You're healing every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here. You turn the lives around. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you. Oh, I worship you. Oh, waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Oh, say waymaker, waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 'Cause that is who you are. 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 You are. That is who you are. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. You never stop working. Sing it out. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. Come on, lift your voice and sing. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop. Oh, waymaker, miracle worker. Oh, my God, that is who you are. Oh, waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. Come on, declare this with me and say, that is who you are. 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 'Cause that is who you are. That is who you are.
Like I said, thanks for being here with us this week. Please don't miss next week. Don't miss next week as we launch our 4LCB initiative. We'll see you then.